All right, audio feeds on. All right. Everything is live.
Welcome everyone. I want to welcome everyone who's in the room. I also want to welcome everyone who's watching us virtually. So I want to tell you where you are. If you're in the room, I hope you know where you are. But if you're not, you're at the New England College of Business. We're located in the Financial District. And this is the Innovation Room at the New England College of Business. Let me tell you a little bit about the college. First of all, let me tell you who I am. I'm Deborah Leahy. I'm the Provost of New England College of Business. And we are 100% online college who serves completely adult learners in business fields. So we have an associate's degree, 3 bachelor's degrees, and 5 master's degrees, certificate degrees, in a variety of business fields. The Innovation Room came as an outgrowth of our history. So we've actually been around since 1909. We started off serving the Banking Institute. So as far as bankers, training bankers on how to do their jobs. So if you think about our location, it's actually quite perfect, being right in the middle of the financial district. But you know, when you think about people working in the banking industry, working their way up and so forth, the idea was an apprenticeship model of business education where people who worked in the field could teach others who work in the field. That started in 1909. It looked very different back then. It was all men. It's no longer the case. I'm looking, I see women. It was all men back then. And it was very much apprenticeship style, you know, one-on-one training, and then it turned into course classes, classroom. We're in a classroom tonight. So you think about a long history of who we've been. We call the American Banking Institute and so forth. What do we have in common today? Because I've already told you what we have that's different today. What we have in common today is we still emphasize industry professionals teaching in our courses and teaching students. However, now we are a college, so we, like I said, we offer the academic degree programs. The Innovation Room is an outgrowth, however, of that history, whereas we have once a month, we have a thought leader come in from one of the industries represented and talks with us about something expert in his or her field. I'm very delighted tonight about our topic and our speaker. We have a Masters of Healthcare Management program, and we have a phenomenal program chair for that program, Dr. Sam Rendell. Dr. Sam Rendell oversees that program. He also works at Cigna, so he brings a tremendous amount of expertise on emotional intelligence and leadership. And when you think about teaching business, if you go back to that 1909 history of ours, it was a lot of teaching hard skills. You know, how do you, perhaps back then it may have been as basic as how do you count money fast? Back then, if you think 1909, how far we've come in business where actually skills like emotional intelligence, mindfulness, pluralistic leadership and so forth have become so much more important that will lead you to those more hard outcomes like productivity, efficiency, and so forth. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Sam Rendell by tonight's discussion.
Okay, so good evening everyone, and for those of you online, thank you for attending the Innovation Room at NECB this evening. And for those of you who have come on the busy Boston T or got here somehow, thank you for coming in person. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about leadership and emotional and social intelligence and why they are key differentiators in you and your success as you continue to work in the corporate environment. Okay? So I have a slide up that you can see online and also here in person. And I have a question. And it's, do you really want it in relation to success? Right? So raise your hand either online or up here in person. Do you want to be successful? Right? Everybody. Do you want to have improved relationships at work? Do you want to make more money and be happy? Okay, good. Well, then you're here for the right reason. All right? So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about leadership styles in particular, emotional intelligence, and social intelligence this evening. So Daniel Goleman, who many of you may have read articles from, comes out of the Harvard Business School, has really developed as the leading expert, or one of the leading experts, in the topic of emotional and social intelligence. And he really brought this concept to life back in 1995 or so, when he started to notice some trends. There was some early research done at a variety of different universities about emotional and social intelligence, but Daniel Goleman really brought it to the forefront. Okay? So he wrote an article entitled Leadership That Gets Results, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that after the session. And in the article, what Daniel Goleman talks about is that leadership is not something that folks are necessarily born with. right? That we learn these leadership skills over time through different experiences. And most of us have this natural tendency to rely on one or two leadership styles, right? Because this is how we're brought up, this is how we're raised, this is how we're taught in the institutional environments of work and home. But the reality is, the most successful leaders in the world are able to use a variety of different leadership styles based on the person and the situation, right? So I liken this to like the game of golf. Does anybody play golf here or online, right? A lot of us, right? So when you play golf, unless you're my son, who takes the putter and tries to hit the ball from, you know, the tee to the green, which doesn't work that well, you have a variety of different clubs in your bag that you would use at any given time. And so you have, you know, the driving wedge, you have the putter, you have the drive, you know, variety of different irons that you would hit. And you decide what you're going to use based on how far you want to hit the ball and where you want it to go. Well, leadership is a lot like that. That we tend to use one or two clubs all the time when we're acting in the role of leader, but we don't really expand our repertoire to use all six, if you will. But what Daniel Goleman would say is that the most successful leaders in the world, as it relates to emotional and social intelligence, can use all six. And I'm going to share with you tonight what those six are and how you can learn a little bit more about them to be more successful in your leadership. Another topic that I talk a lot about, and again, as Deborah mentioned, obviously I teach here at NECB in the MHM program, also have taught in the MBA program as well, and also work in a professional capacity at Cigna. And when I I'm an executive coach as well. And so when I coach leaders around the world, you know, in terms of their emotional intelligence, social intelligence, leadership in general, there's this concept of the big L versus the little L that I often talk about. Does anybody know what I mean by that? The big L versus the little L. Anybody online? No? All right, well, I'll tell you. How's that? The big L is what people typically think of as leadership. I'm the leader, I need to be out in front every time leading, and I need to be in charge. When you talk about leadership, people typically will give you that somewhat type of definition. The reality is, people also who are good leaders need to demonstrate the ability to be the little L. And the little L means that in order for you to develop your people, your teams, and to make your organization and culture and company more successful, leaders need to be able to go back and forth between both. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the heli view, right? So leaders in a helicopter would need to hover over their folks and understand what's going on, and sometimes they need to get in the weeds. But it's appropriate for a leader sometimes to not be visibly the person that's in charge, right? And we've read examples of that, we've seen good examples of leaders who have demonstrated that. The other is I'll hand out a sheet in a minute, and online, Janine had sent over a PDF, I believe, for all of you to review, and it's the first page of the PDF, and I'll hand this out in person. But this is talking about the 6 different leadership styles that Daniel Goleman talks about for leadership. And it will talk to you about the leader's modus operandi, you know, the phrase that most describes the style specifically, the underlying emotional intelligence competencies, when the style works best, and the overall impact on the climate. Because what we're concerned with as leaders in teaching leadership is that leadership simply, by definition, is a function of the person and the situation. So leadership is a function of the person and the situation. So that means that you need to, if you want to be an effective leader, be able to pull out whatever club it is in that golf bag and use it at any given time based on the person and the situation. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so I'll hand this out. If you don't mind passing this out here. Online, again, you have the PDF. Just you pass it back for me. Good. Good. one per person, yeah, they're all the same. So when you look at the sheet, again, it's on the first page of the PDF, you'll see there's 6 different leadership styles on the x-axis on the top, starting with commanding, visionary, affiliative, democratic, pace-setting, and coaching. Those are the 6 leadership styles that Daniel Goleman talks about in the article Leadership That Gets Results, okay? And on the y-axis, you can see, as I mentioned earlier, the leader's modus operandi, the style to describe, like the phrase that would most describe that style. So let's just look at commanding, for instance. If you look at the modus operandi, it says demands immediate compliance. Now most people would say, you know, I don't ever want to use that style, right? Because it doesn't seem like something that is a positive leadership style. But when you're in a compliance situation and you work in a bank, or you work in a hospital or healthcare setting, and there's an emergency, a leader has to use that leadership style, right? You can't be using the coaching style, asking people what do they think they should do, what's going on with your career, or the affiliative style, or any of those. There's a place and time to use that. However, at the bottom of that, you see the overall impact on the climate if the style is used consistently. So again, there's a negative impact on the climate if that leader's modus operandi is always to use a commanding style. We know that's not a positive long-term style to use. However, it is a style that you may need to demonstrate and use in any given situation, again, based on the person and the situation, okay? So I won't go over all of this in detail because, you know, it'll take too much time, but take a look at this because this is a really valuable chart and it will help you understand the 6 leadership styles and how you think about yourself. Like, what are the 2 that you probably use the most? Because we all have a tendency to use maybe 2. And how can you develop your skill set to be more effective, to have a bigger repertoire and use more clubs in the back, okay? So again, as you can see here, the 6 leadership styles on the screen. Commanding or coercive, it demands immediate attention or compliance. Visionary, you mobilize people towards a vision. You know, you can picture those people, you read a lot about them in books and you see them on television. Affiliative creates harmony and builds emotional bonds with people, strong connections. Democratic, you ask for people's suggestions. The danger is a lot of people would say, I want to be a democratic leader. So that sounds good, right? But there's some challenges there. If you ask people all the time what they think, and they give you their suggestions and feedback, but me as a leader, I'm not really listening to them and understanding what they're saying, there's negative repercussions there. You lose credibility, right? And you don't seem authentic. Pace setting, this is true of a lot of high potentials. So we have some really good electrical engineers, right? We have some really good scientists, really good bankers, really good folks in social media. And they're really good as individual contributors. But then they become managers and leaders of people. And that pace setting skill, them being so good at what they do, it's difficult for them to lead their people in the right way because they think everything has to be done their way. And if their team and people aren't keeping pace with what they're doing, they feel like they're inferior in some ways. So you need to watch out for that one as well. And coaching, of course, is quite obvious. It's the development of people, the development of talent in an organization. Important. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the most successful, I can't emphasize this enough, the most successful leaders can demonstrate a variety of both. And when they do, there's a positive impact on the climate in an organization. Okay? And many of you may have heard of the Hay Group, Leadership Styles and Climate. They do a lot of work in this area of the leadership styles. Really great assessment. All right. Now you know a little bit about leadership. Before we move into the concept of emotional intelligence, which kind of goes right hand in hand, do you have any questions regarding leadership? No questions? How about online?
There's a slight delay, so if there are, there will be.
You let me know, Allie, okay? All right. So emotional intelligence. I'm opening this up to those of you online and in person. What is it? What do you think emotional intelligence is when you hear the topic? Yes?
Understand other people's emotion.
Understand how others feel, emotions, yes, okay, good. Dennis?
Capacity to cope or handle adversity.
Okay. Yes?
Awareness of what others are coming from and where you're projecting.
Excellent. Remember that word awareness, because you're going to see that again. Okay? Great, thank you. Anyone online? Or they're quiet online tonight, huh? Okay. All right. So that's good. So that's what is it. But why do you think it matters so much? You know, why do you think that business executives, companies, are paying a lot of attention on this topic? And trust me, they are, right? So companies all over the world are paying close attention to this topic of emotional intelligence because it makes organizations go from good to great. So what do you think? Why does it matter? Yeah.
Because companies are made up of people
Ah,
who have emotions.
yes. Does everybody get that? Companies are made up of talent, right? People. And you know, there's some companies that rely more on resources and technology than they do. There's a mix out there, right? You know, Google is one of them, right? That is, and Amazon has really changed the structure of the employee base at the company. However, at the heart of every company is the talent, and that's why this matters. Okay? This is the good thing. Is on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see IQ. On the right hand, you see EQ. So when I refer to emotional intelligence, sometimes when you read some articles, you'll see EQ, sometimes you'll see EI, right? EI, or emotional intelligence, I like to think of it as the overarching umbrella of the topic, right? Think of emotional intelligence as the overarching umbrella. EQ is emotional quotient, which means you're measuring something, right? So there's an assessment there, and you're measuring it. But let's look a little bit more about IQ. You know, we all took SATs, we all took the standardized test, and throughout our whole educational system and process, people have been measuring how smart we are, right? That's how we got into college. That's how we get jobs sometimes, but not always. And so the difference is IQ is mostly static after the age of 17. No matter what anybody in this room does, or anybody online does, the IQ is not going to change all that much, okay, after the age of 17. It is not, I'll repeat, IQ is not tightly correlated to leadership success at all. And people's self-theory about intelligence has a profound impact on motivation to learn. And that comes out of Carol Dweck. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her work, but that's where that comes from. On the other hand, what we're talking about tonight, emotional and social intelligence, the good thing is that EQ, emotional intelligence or quotient, can change. It's malleable, you can develop it, you've got to work hard, right? It's not just going to come overnight, you've got to work at this. It's like when you think, you know, we're in Boston here, so we're in Patriot country and Red Sox country. When you think of Tom Brady, he just didn't wake up one day and become a phenomenal quarterback. He had to work at it. So just if you want to be a really effective leader, you have to work at it, right? It's the same concept. It just doesn't happen overnight. EQ is tightly correlated to leadership success. And the good thing is it's acquired. We can coach on it, and it's teachable, right? So this is what we like to say. On the screen here, you can see on the y-axis, we have relative value of competency. The first is technical professional competence, which is really the orange color you see on the screen. It may be distorted a bit. The bottom is social and emotional competence. On the x-axis, you can see level, you know, starting from right out of college to CEO. What does this tell you? What does this chart tell you?
The more you progress in your career, the more EQ you need.
Excellent. That's exactly what it tells you. The higher you want to go in the company, right, from being a graduate to middle manager, senior executive, the technical piece of you being an expert in something becomes less and less important. And the emotional intelligence piece becomes extraordinarily important. Okay? So, and this is from the sources on the bottom there. So what I have for you now, those of you online, I'd ask you to go to page 2 in your packet. Do not flip to page 3. Just go to page 2. You can take, those of you in person, just take one of these and pass it back. I have some pens if you need a pen. I don't have pens for you online, but so I'll give you 5 minutes to just stay on the first page. And what I'd ask you to do, pens? So stay on the first page, and what I'd ask you to do is, this is a self-assessment for emotional intelligence. There are 4 different sections, section 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there are various questions underneath each section. On the right-hand side of the page, what I'd like you to do is put a 0 for seldom, if you don't do it very often or at all, a 1 for often, and a 2 for frequently. Okay? So rate each question based on those numbers. And do not flip the page over yet.
All 4 sections?
All 4 sections, please, yes. We're not grading this test, so don't worry. Can't fail. Do you want?
Oh, no, good.
Come on, Al. Go with your gut. Don't think about it too long. Is everybody okay online, Allie? They're able to find it? Okay.
There are no comments, therefore no news must be good news.
Okay. Once you're done with each section, then calculate the scores in each section, underneath each section, where it says calculate section 1, total based on points. Add those up. Looking around the room to see when everyone's finished. Okay, so once you've added those sections up, I will give you permission now to flip the page over and you'll see what they correlate to. So section 1 is self-awareness, section 2 is self-management, section 3 is social awareness, and section 4 is relationship management. Transfer those total scores for each section onto page 2. And if your score is between 0 and 4 for a section, it's recommended for further development. If it's 5 through 9, it's a possible area for development, and 10 through 14 would be an area of strength. And again, this is a self-assessment. So there's challenges with self-assessments because people's self-awareness isn't always accurate. However, it is very valid because we do use this quite frequently when I consult and coach on the topic of emotional intelligence. Okay? So hopefully save that and think about that as we go through the next section of the presentation. So, those four areas on page 2 that I mentioned, the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, make up the emotional intelligent quadrant that we call it, okay? On the x-axis here, you see self, right? And others, awareness, and action. So everything really starts with this idea of self-awareness, right? You can see the arrows of emotional intelligence. It all starts in the box with self-awareness before you can ultimately end with relationship management. I'm going to dive into each one of those sections in depth for you so you understand a little bit more about that and give you some questions to ask yourself to, see if you can improve those areas. So self-awareness, the first box, is the foundation of the topic of emotional intelligence. It is the foundation. The challenge is a lot of us don't have really good self-awareness. We think we do, right? Just like a lot of us think that we're really good listeners, but there's a real difference between hearing and listening. So we hear things, but we don't actively listen. So it's a skill set globally that when I ask people to self-rate themselves on their listening skills, people would absolutely rate themselves a lot higher than their team's spouses, significant others, or managers would rate them, okay? So again, self-awareness, it's the foundation of this core concept of emotional intelligence. Everything stems from this. To effectively manage others, we must effectively be able to manage ourselves first, okay? If you're self-aware, you know how you feel, you know how your emotions and actions can affect the people around you, okay? Sometimes we have bad days, sometimes we have good days, but people who are self-aware are aware of those kind of emotions. Self-awareness means the ability to monitor our inner world, whatever that means to us, our thoughts and feelings. And this concept of mindfulness has really taken off in the last couple of years. Is anybody familiar with this concept of mindfulness? Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I've seen a couple different things. I've seen a lot of people who are practicing meditation, and what it really is being in the moment.
Yes.
So you're really, you're not thinking ahead so that, to your point, if you want to listen, you're actually not thinking about how you're going to respond. It's really receiving what's there.
It's really like, this concept that we call being present, right? Being there in the moment. And it's incredibly important for leadership and management. Because if you're having coaching sessions with your direct reports, or you're trying to move up in an organization and improve your leadership capabilities and competencies, if you don't really listen to people and have a good sense of who you are, your areas of strength, I never say weakness because I don't believe in that term. I believe in the term of opportunities because we all have opportunities for improvement, right? That's really important. But companies are spending a lot of money on the topic of mindfulness these days because what they're finding is that when employees can, do meditation, as you mentioned, and do other things that are a better work-life balance. A company could never determine what a good work-life balance is for an individual, but they can holistically determine what might be good for a larger population, right? So mindfulness is one method for enhancing this capacity of self-awareness. So these are some questions that you might ask yourself to determine where you are with self-awareness. What am I feeling? So where in my body do I feel whatever it is? Is it similar to any other feeling that I've had? And am I feeling more of one thing at a time or something else? Okay? How am I acting because of this feeling? Do I often always act like this? Because sometimes we think, again, we are the worst assessors of our own self-awareness, right? You'll hear that from Daniel Goleman in a minute in the video. But we are. So what we need to do is ask others. But this whole idea of asking others for feedback is not always easy for people. And I'll talk about that in a minute. When did I start to act like this? You know, what point did that happen? Are you frustrated at work? Are you not feeling satisfied? Are you overwhelmed? You know, so when those things happen, people start to change. And unless people tell you you're not the same or there's something that's not right, then how would you know unless you check yourself on it? What impact am I having on others or myself, right? What's the impact? How do others typically respond when I feel like this? And is that really what I intended to come across, right? Because likely it's not. And have I ever received or asked for feedback on the topic? And how would I like others to respond to me when I feel this way? Okay? So, feedback, right? We say, oh, it's the gift of champions, right? The feedback is the gift of champions. However, no one loves to get feedback unless it's positive. And some people don't even love to get positive feedback, right? I mean, depending on your personality type, your communication type, if you're more extroverted, introverted, if you're thinking or feeling based on MBTI profiles, there's a variety of ways that you need to get feedback. But what I would say is feedback is important, and it truly is a gift. Some feedback you get along the course of your journey in leadership and management is going to be valid. Some of it's not going to be valid. So consider the source. But if you're hearing consistent things related to your work performance, your attitude, your behaviors, then start to notice that and do something different with the feedback. Because in the end, feedback is what makes people better, right? So I talked about Brady before, right? Being a great quarterback. And of course we're in New England here, so I've got to mention that. But he didn't get great because he never received feedback or didn't want it. He got good because the coaches invested in him. They gave him feedback. He didn't always love it, but that's how he got better. And that's, as a leader, that's the kind of tone and culture you want to set within an organization. That feedback should be both ways, right? It shouldn't always go down in an organization. Feedback should go up as well. And sometimes you'll hear people talk about the concept of managing up in an organization. That's exactly what I mean, okay? Self-management, the second part, right? It's the self piece still. The more aware you become of your own emotions, the better you can become at managing yourself. So you got the emotions under control, now you're going to manage yourself. So what triggers my feelings? We all have triggers that set us off. All of us. And so do you really know what those are? Right? Is it when people think that you don't get credit for work that you've done? Is it when other people take the big L all the time and never let you step up to the big L and keep you down in the small L too much? So there's a variety of things that happen. What happens if I embrace or resist those? And how do I tend to react? How do I tend to react in those situations? Does it help or hinder me? What preferences do I have that help me understand myself? This is important, really important. Do I tend to introvert and reflect, or extrovert and talk it out? And a lot of you, especially those of you online perhaps, work in a virtual environment. And so when you're working in a virtual environment, you're not necessarily seeing verbals versus nonverbals and how people are reacting to your whatever you're saying. And when you study communication for a long time, people will tell you that when nonverbals don't match what people are saying, meaning the verbal, people will always believe the nonverbal, always. And so this is important. So we do a lot of work, NACB, and if your organization or you're interested in more explanation on emotional intelligence, you want to do an assessment, you want to have consulting from our faculty members on any of these topics, MBTI, DISC, personalysis, we offer those services here at NACB. But the reason I mention it is that the best companies in the world do these assessments, right? And we do these with our partner organizations. And it's important because the more you know how people want to be communicated to, and the more about their preferences, the more you can become effective at emotional intelligence. do I process best through thinking or feeling? And that thinking or feeling, those of you who are familiar with MBTI, the Myers-Briggs assessment, is a differentiator, right? Are you a thinker or are you a feeler? What can I do to anticipate these triggers, reduce, avoid, or change the impact? Okay? Now last, right, before we get to the relationship, social awareness. When we are able to be aware of our own feelings and manage them effectively, our opportunities for being aware of what's going on with others rise exponentially. Exponentially. The more self-aware you become and the more you can manage yourself, remember each piece is building here, the more aware you can become of others and their preferences, that word preferences is key, and triggers. So if I'm somebody in a DISC profile that really only likes high-level detail, just tell me why I need to go down street 1 versus street 2. That's all I want to know, really. If you are somebody who's a C type of personality and drives towards the detail, you're going to have me at the first word. I'm not going to pay, I'm checked out. So if you can communicate in a way that is meaningful to your team and your people that you work with, you will be all that more effective. And this isn't just true professionally, this is true personally. So the DISC profile can definitely apply, based on the person and the situation, to your home life as well. Okay? So some questions. Social awareness helps you identify and understand what's happening, what are they feeling, not what you're feeling, what are they feeling, how are they reacting to their feelings, what impact am I having on them, and what triggered their response. Why do they react that way? Understanding is the best precursor to acting. Understanding how others are feeling. And the final piece, this is culminating now for this emotional intelligence piece, is relationship management. You can't really work on relationship management unless you work on the others first, right? So if I'm coaching you and this is a little bit lower, I would focus on one of the other 3 areas first and say, let's see what we can do to move the needle in those areas, okay? So once we understand what triggers someone, how they respond in any given situation, and the impact of the response, we're in a position to effectively manage the relationship. And as we all know, in the business world, managing relationships is critical to success. What can I do to have a positive impact on this person, organization, or business? How can I support them in their preferences? And what do I need to know about them to strengthen my impact in the relationship? Right? Strengthening that relationship. And how can you leverage the relationship as well? So, any questions about the 4 quadrants before I move into this next section? No? And online you have those on pages 4 and 5 in the packet as well. So emotional intelligence is a collection of components comprising of our emotional, social, and psychological well-being, right? Those are the 3 big components. There's a variety of different emotional intelligence kind of assessments out there. The one that I prefer and use quite frequently is called Emotional Intelligence EQI 2.0. So it's a self-assessment that you would do, or your organization would have leaders or managers complete. And it takes 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes, and there's a variety of different questions. And it's based on a normative database of 4,000 other leaders at any given point in time, and it asks you to answer specific questions. And then it comes up with and I'm going to show you what the EQI mandala looks like about how we assess that. Okay? It's important to know that it relates to potential for performance and not performance itself. Okay? It's comprised of elements that can change and be altered, as I mentioned before. And emotional intelligence requires effective communication between the rational and emotional centers of the brain. Okay? I put a little science in there for you guys tonight. All right. So now we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence. Let's switch over to this concept called social intelligence. What do you guys think that social, so we have emotional intelligence, what's social intelligence? Any idea?
I mean, it's to effectively communicate with the society, to interact effectively with the society.
Good. And when you interact with who?
With other people.
other people. Excellent. So emotional intelligence is about you as an individual. Social intelligence is taking you as an individual and putting you in that group, and that's what organizations are particularly interested in. How do you take this person, and this person, because really 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. It equals 3 or more, right? It's that whole concept. So you can see my lovely graphic up there about it. So now what I have is, I thought this would be really helpful as we talked a little bit about leadership, a little bit about emotional and social intelligence, to hear from the leading expert in the field. So when I do consulting on this topic, I always show this video because it really is impactful. It'll give you a really good understanding to hear from the expert himself, Daniel Bowman.
Senior Editor at Harvard Business Review. And I'm delighted to have today as my guest, Dan Goleman. Dan is a psychologist known around the world for his expertise in social and emotional intelligence. He is also the co-author of the Harvard Business Review article, Social Intelligence and the Biology of Leadership. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Dan, we've invited you because we want to talk about social and emotional intelligence and how they affect organizations and leaders. So let's just start at the beginning. Emotional intelligence, what is it and why is it important for us?
Emotional intelligence refers to how we handle ourselves. Are we aware of our feelings, our passions, the things that turn us on, the things that turn us off, what makes us effective, what gets in the way, and also how we manage our emotions. Do we let things interrupt our ability to focus, to get work done effectively or not? And empathy, recognizing other people's emotions, knowing how the other person sees things, how they're feeling, and using that all to interact with people effectively.
You know, your work has changed how leaders and businesses do their work around the world. Can you think of a leader who's changed how he's done his work or how she's done her work based on your insights into emotional intelligence?
Well, you know, I hear about hundreds, but I can't name any. I can think of, though, a very highly placed executive who was hearing from direct reports that things weren't going so well. The messages came, for example, from people leaving, as well as a lot of grumblings. And it turned out that when he really faced what was going on, people were saying, you just don't listen. You just tell us what you think. You say you want to hear what we know, and we know a lot, but you don't really seem to care about it. What he had to do was get better at the social intelligence ability of listening, of tuning into other people. And it's a real problem for many executives because, of course, you know a lot, but you don't know everything. But because you're the boss, people defer to you. So they start listening. But the really excellent, the outstanding leaders we find are people who first listen and get other people to say what they think and what they know, and then to put that all together for a higher order integration. That's real leadership. That's what he had to learn. And through coaching, he was able to change. And his business performance, the performance of his unit, was much, much better afterward than before.
So the level of a leader's emotional intelligence affects organizational performance.
We have so much data now, about 10 years of accumulated data from organizations of all kinds, showing that there's a direct correlation between the emotional intelligence of leadership at every level and how that organization performs, by whatever performance metric you want to use.
Well, but it seems to me that leaders often think they have more emotional intelligence than they do. How do you begin to assess your level of emotional intelligence?
Actually, I think we all think we have more emotional intelligence than we do. One of the most brutal ways is to ask your teenage child. But at work, what you can do is ask other people, because it turns out that we ourselves are not the best gauge of how we're impacting other people. But other people, if you can get them to be candid, can tell you what your strengths are, and we all have them, and what you can get better at. And that's the most interesting, valuable information, because that's where any leader can get a bump in improvement. By getting better, say, at listening, as that executive did, you can become a more effective leader. And therefore, because you depend on other people for your success, by getting better at listening to them, helping them develop, helping them do their jobs well, the whole organization benefits.
Interesting. Dan, you talk about emotional intelligence, and I'm very curious how you got from that to social intelligence.
Well, emotional intelligence, when I first wrote it, was prompted for me by a new breakthrough in brain science in our understanding of the emotional centers of the brain and how that affects our ability to think well. It turns out that when we're upset, it hampers our ability to process information, to think creatively. We fall back on overlearned primitive behaviors, and it makes us dysfunctional. But if we're passionate about what we're doing, if we're motivated or in the throes of positive emotion, we think very, very clearly. So there was immediate, obvious implication for business there, and I wrote about that. My new work on social intelligence has been stimulated by the same thing. Big breakthrough in brain science. Now they're studying not just one brain and one body and one person, but two, the interaction. We're finding out that this is the key to why a leader like Herb Kelleher at Southwest was so spectacularly successful in growing that airline. We've been looking at video of Herb Kelleher just walking down the hallway at Love Field in Dallas, and it's as though there were a circle of good feeling radiating around him wherever he went. Everyone, passengers, personnel, passers-by, all of a sudden light up and beam, because he was someone who engaged people, who was positive, and who let you know that he was tuning into you, and he was doing it with such positivity that it was contagious for you.
Now, how about leaders who don't have that natural born instinct? How can they use your insights on emotional and social intelligence in order to improve their leadership expertise?
Well, first of all, for leadership, it's social intelligence that our data is showing counts the most. Social intelligence is being able to tune into other people, to read them, to know how they're thinking about things, what they're feeling right now, and using that to communicate effectively with them. And the good news is that even though we learn our habits, for example, what kind of listener are you? We learn those early in life. We can change them at any point if we're motivated, if we know what to do, and if we have a little help. So there's an easy 5-step process, basically, for enhancing social intelligence abilities in a leader. First, the question to ask yourself is, do you care? Are you motivated? Because it's going to take a little effort. Second, get some feedback. It's not, you're actually probably the worst person to judge where you need to improve. You need to ask the people around you in a way where they can be candid, they can be honest, and that's often with a 360 device where they anonymously rate you. You don't know who said it, but you're getting the truth. You look at that profile and you identify your strengths, your weaknesses, where I can get better, where can I get a bump. Then you make a learning agreement with yourself to do it in a better way at every naturally occurring opportunity. If you do that for a few months, you see real change.
So how can a company use social intelligence in order to increase organizational performance?
So many companies are doing that now. I just spent the morning with a group where a national insurance company, a global pharmaceutical company, a world-famous medical center, we're all doing the same thing with emotional intelligence. They're using it to enhance the effectiveness of their leadership, but also to change the culture. And the way they're doing it is by integrating it into the HR function. They're trying to hire people who have these abilities already. That was the strategy that Southwest used. They looked for people who were like little Herb Kelleher's, and it worked great. It worked beautifully for them. They're promoting for these abilities. It becomes part of how you're evaluated and part of what's looked for in taking people to the next level in the organization. And they're also putting a lot of effort into individual development to help everybody grow these abilities to a greater strength.
So if we were to go back and sum up for our audience today, you would say the difference between emotional and social intelligence is?
Emotional intelligence really has to do with self-mastery, how you handle yourself, and it makes outstanding individual performers. There are so many people in the world of work that are excellent, but they're excellent because of their own efforts, and they have very good discipline, they have very good motivation, they have drive. These are individual abilities. But when it comes to leadership, Your success depends on everyone else's being effective. So you need to be successful by influencing, persuading, developing, growing, inspiring, motivating other people. That's the social intelligence ability. It requires empathy and requires skilled interaction, and that's what makes a great leader.
Dan, one of the problems that companies really have is figuring out how to hire people, because it's so difficult to hire people and know what their emotional and social intelligence levels are. So how do you go about trying to find little Herb Kelleher's?
Well, first of all, if you're looking for a Herb Kelleher type, you have to expand the criterion, because Herb was a unique individual. He was extremely extroverted, extremely up. But social intelligence doesn't always look like that. One of the sure signs of social intelligence is rapport. You feel comfortable with the person. You feel they're paying full attention. You feel they are really listening to you. They're really attuning. They're really empathizing. And we all know what that feels like. We feel felt. When you're with someone like that, you have chemistry. That's one of the sure signs.
Dan Goldman, thank you very much.
Diane Cotu, it was a real pleasure. Thanks.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that video, and it summarized a little bit of what we discussed earlier today in regards to emotional and social intelligence. The EQI 2.0 is a very widely used around the world globally assessment on emotional intelligence. As you can see, we call this the EQI mandala. On the outer section of the wheel is overall well-being, emotional and social functioning, right? So you see that as well as performance. The components of the 5 composites, stress management, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, and decision-making, are the 5 components. And under each of those 5 components, we measure 3 different things. And you can see that's the inner portion of the wheel. So for instance, on self-perception, we would measure self-regard, self-actualization, and emotional self-expression, okay? And you would answer questions that were relating to those topics. You wouldn't know that ahead of time, and we couldn't show you that ahead of time, but you'd answer those, and then you'd get results based on where other leaders are in that same area. And then there would be opportunities from a consulting perspective to say, these are areas of strength, and these are areas of opportunity for growth, okay? But that's really what visually that looks like. So, as we think about learning more about these topics and about the thing about feedback, there's this general thing that we hear often, and some of you may laugh with this, but these are some common reactions to feedback. My job makes me act that way. I'm really not like that, right? This is just a bad time to do this. I wasn't in a great mood, right? I was busy doing other things. All my strengths are correct or right, but my weaknesses are not. Right on, I've heard that before. I'm nearing the end of my career. I'm not changing. This is just the way I am. Take it or leave it, right? Those kind of responses is an example of a fixed mindset. And organizations are really keen on hiring, retaining, and promoting individuals with a growth mindset. So what I would say to you is, if you're starting this kind of negative thoughts are creeping in, change it. Because feedback is a gift. And take it like that. Get feedback from a variety of different sources so that you can improve your emotional, social, right, overall well-being, and be a more effective leader and manager. I have 2 more slides here to end it, but keep learning. I have a great quote here that I'd like to read. Emotional intelligence is the single best predictor of performance in the workplace, and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. And when we increase our effective use of emotional intelligence, we see an increase in our ability to develop more solid, trusting relationships in our business arena. Powerful. So if I'm a betting guy, and I'm not, but if I'm a betting guy, then I would say this is something that I would closely pay attention to if you really want to be successful in the business world. And not just in the business sector, but in general in the workplace. I'll leave you with a final quote by Dr. Seuss. This is important. To the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you may be the world. So I wish you all the best as you continue your successful management and leadership journey. I'll open it up to questions that you may have. And please feel free to reach out to any of us at NECB. We're here to support you in your development throughout your career. And we have a lot of phenomenal programs that can help you and others in your organization be successful. So thank you. Any questions? Online or in person? Yes?
Where I can read about instruments, how to increase my emotional intelligence. How you said that it can be increased over life.
Yes.
But what if I really want to change? If I really want to work on it, I feel the need. So
Yes.
it's the first step, I think.
Good.
What are the next steps? And what is the criteria or sample where I should go with this?
So that's a great question. My recommendation is to find some assessment. It may be appropriate for you to find the EQI 2.0 and do that with us or do that with someone else that you may feel appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But the first step is awareness. You have the awareness and desire to do something different. That's number one. Number two, take the assessment. Whatever assessment that is. Take it, get the feedback, work with somebody as a coach to work on how you're going to analyze it and understand it, and then have an action plan about doing something different with that feedback. And when you work on that development plan, have a variety of different sources give you feedback at given points in time. And then check yourself again and see if you're able to move the needle. That's my recommendation. Okay? Anybody else?
Are there
Yes.
ever instances when you, because I'm trying to think if we put all of the managers in a room and we gave them a 360 kind of survey type thing to get feedback on one another, are there any ever instances where that just kind of blows up and everyone just gets really angry with each other?
Well,
I could see
there
that
are, right?
potential of that.
So the important part of whenever you launch something like that is that it's we call stakeholder engagement, right? So you need somebody to be a sponsor higher up in the organization to create the environment and trust and culture that is really, in creating that sense of that this is important. This is going to move our organization, as I mentioned before, from good to great. And in order for us to get there, as a leader, I'm sponsoring this, I need all of you to really invest in this. And some of the feedback you're going to get is going to be hard to receive, and I understand that. But overall, it will help you personally, it will help our organization grow. So if a leader sets that context and that culture, it's incredibly important. But as a consultant, we could not go into an organization and run a 360 and have that kind of session without a sponsor in the organization. That would be dangerous, right? Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jenny.
Do you have anything or know of anything about trigger training? So once you know your trigger,
Yeah.
when you're dealing in the world,
Yeah.
how you react to that trigger. I think that's psychotherapy.
Well, yeah, there's always that, right? But there are some things that I encourage folks. So if you're working in a workspace and you can put Post-it notes up on your desk or computer. If you know that there's certain things that people say or do that trigger you, look at them, right? And it will remind you from a psychological perspective, okay, don't say anything right now, or stop and take a 5-minute break. So for some leaders who are very direct and can be coercive and use a little bit too much of the coercive leadership style, when I coach them, I say, make sure you have, or I would recommend that you have a delay on your email, because they have this overt response. It may be very harsh, it may not be appropriate, but when they step back and think about it, they would have responded in a different way because something triggered them, whatever that might be. So it's putting those things in your workspace and around you and asking for feedback. So, confide in a few people and say, look, I'm really trying to work on this. Give me some feedback. And they will. And sometimes people say, I'll give you feedback, and they'll say, oh, Daniel, you're doing everything great. You're just perfect. No. No, right? Because in order for you to grow, there's got to be some opportunity for growth. And the way I position it in a growth mindset way is that we all have a lot of strengths. We all do, each of us. And you got to believe in those. And you got to nourish those and keep going with those. But we all have opportunities, not weaknesses, opportunities. And if you think about it that way, and you create that kind of environment to receive the feedback and give feedback, that's powerful. Is that helpful? Good. Yes?
Which strategy is better? To further develop strengths, for example, I know this is my strengths and this is my weaknesses or opportunities, or to put my efforts to work on opportunities and weaknesses, but forget about opportunities and develop only strengths.
So that's a great question. My recommendation would be to balance. So you've got to continue to develop those strengths. You can't let them go. It's likely that those strengths will continue to be strengths for somebody, but sometimes the opportunities are what hold people back, right? So when you think about people in the workplace, there's one or two things that are holding them back from that next promotion, or moving up from a manager to a senior manager to an executive level. And if they can develop those things and not make them a liability and make them a strength, that's really powerful, right? So, all of a sudden you're not a great listener, you identify that you're not a great listener, and it's something that you work on and get better at, then that's powerful. I mean, I like to talk, right? It's pretty obvious. But, so when I first started managing people, in the coaching conversations that I used to have, I would talk a lot. And then I realized through coaching and through learning these kind of development programs that, look, in order for me to be the most effective manager, I need to listen more and talk less. So what I would do, this sounds a little bit elementary, but and I was in a physical office, I would put my hand underneath my leg and I would sit on it because it would remind me, don't say anything, because I had a natural tendency to do that. And over time I learned to become better at that. But unless I was willing to receive that feedback and do something differently with it, then I would have always been the same. And I would have probably never moved up from an organizational perspective. Yeah? Any other questions?
From an organizational perspective, if you want to approach someone who is unsolicited, maybe I haven't actually asked you to do this, but it's someone you don't have influence over directly, so it's someone above you or lateral to you, how would you recommend starting a conversation? I mean, you couldn't go in and say, I think your emotional intelligence is lacking, but how would you basically say that without saying that?
Yeah, no, that's a question that we often get, right? How do you approach somebody where you don't have a formal relationship or they may be a peer? And it's rapport, right? So you've got to establish some kind of rapport with somebody, and then once you have that and you kind of build trust in some capacity, because trust and candor go hand in hand, it's reinforcing the positive things that individual and contributions that they're making, that they're doing, and then saying, look, this is some feedback I have, you can do whatever you like with it, but I'm trying to invest in you, and I want to see you be successful in the organization, and I've just observed this. And my recommendation is when you give that feedback, base it on observable behaviors. Not on hearsay, not on rumor mill, but observable behaviors that you or people that report to you in the organization have noticed. That's what I would say. Yeah?
I got a follow-up question on that, because I was just, when you were saying that, I was thinking of cases like that. What do you do when you do that, but they try to attack the observable behaviors? Like, well, I had a bad day that day, or, well, that person did this first. So they don't see it as an overarching trend in their behavior. They see that they can cancel out the 3 examples of observable behavior you gave. So I think that's easy for people to go to those cases.
Right.
That also shows how low they are in the emotional intelligence level, by the way.
Well, they're not open to receive feedback.
Right.
That is the challenge. Everything you say, they have a response. It's like everything that you tell them, they justify it or feel like they have to justify it. And so it's important that if you you have to keep trying, but it's important that you work with the senior leaders in the organization to help drilling down that culture of what is important. So, that senior leader who they may report to may have to, if you really want to have a culture of confidence and trust, say, I expect everybody in the organization to be receptive to feedback. And I want that culture to be cultivated. And so when you give each other feedback in the organization, I want you to listen and receive it. Now, some of it might be good, some of it might not be, but if you're not willing and open to receive it, then you'll always stay where you are. And often what happens is, you all know if you stay where you are, people surpass you very quickly. And then you could become irrelevant in the organization. So either they're on the bus or they're off the bus. And as a leader, right, your style may be very democratic. What do you think? You know, how do you want it in coaching? And those are probably your two styles, right? But sometimes you may have to demonstrate a little bit of a coercive style and say, are you on or off the bus? Because we've tried to have these coaching conversations and it's not being received. And that's not ideal, but sometimes it has to happen. Okay? Anybody else? Online, do we have any questions? No? Okay, hope everyone has a good evening online. Thank you for attending. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me on the NEBC website, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.